I am here today with Tom Mitt, who I have had the pleasure of knowing. We were just talking about this. I'm not really sure. We're going to go 8, 9 years, maybe longer,
Something like that. It was 8, 9 years. Seems like 20 or 30.
but in a good way.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Of course, in a good way.
A good way.
I have been hounding him to do this for I don't even know how long.
Well, I've been doing this for 2 years.
Okay, so 2 years then.
Yeah.
I've been hounding you for
Yeah.
this. You are the founder, the inspiration behind the Stories Project.
And you're the cause of it.
I am not the cause of it.
You are. You are. You don't know this story, but you were there for the story. Remember, for a long time we were doing Friday coffee chats.
Yes,
on
that's
Zoom.
right.
You remember that?
Yes.
And I said I had this thought and this idea.
Right, so I was not the cause of it.
Well,
I merely
no. I was telling the story about my mom and all of
Yes.
that, right? And it was, and you and Melissa were on the line. I can't remember who else was, but I remember the two of you especially. And I was telling you this story about my mom and
Yeah.
the whole thing. Part of this turns out part of this, and you guys were just thrilled by it. And you said, "Oh, you got to do something with this."
But didn't you already have the thought to do this?
I don't know. I was because I think I told some other stories, because I loved that coffee chat stuff.
You
I
told so many stories, and we're going to get to some of those.
But I remember telling some other stories, and so I was kind of inspired to tell stories, right? And so I thought, well, I've got this book, which I'll mention, and that my mom had written. So I thought I'd tell you guys because it's a cool story.
It's an
right?
amazing story.
And it's kind of a life story. It's like a life lesson kind of story, right? And I thought, well, you guys seemed willing to listen to what the junk I was spewing before that. Let me tell you something that's a little bit more interesting or more important. And so I told you guys about that, and you were all like slack-jawed going, wow, that's so cool. And then somewhere along the line, and I don't remember if it was you or it was Melissa, but it was one of the two of you said, you got to do this. You got to do something with this.
And I thought you had said, though, I kind of have this idea of how would I help people share
maybe
those
I do
stories.
too, son.
Maybe.
That
Okay.
sounds
Give
about
yourself
right.
some credit. So share the story of your mom.
I have to go back a little bit with this because that'll give the roots of why this is so important. I grew up. My parents are. I grew up in Chicago, and my parents were wonderful. Looking back on it, my dad especially was like. I try to be like him as much as I can. Unfortunately, he passed away suddenly at the age of 53 of his third heart attack.
Oh my gosh.
His first one when he was 39, right? Second one, and that one. Now, when he was 39, the world, how they handled heart attacks was way different than they do now.
Oh, sure. The fact that he survived 3?
Well, they survived 2.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize. Yes.
But and so when he was 39, had his first one. He was working as in a machine shop, Rockwell Automation in Chicago, right?
Okay.
And he was a floor foreman, and working with these big machine tools, things that would make other equipment. And he would take me around and there, and I got to I still smelled the grease from the factories, and I love it.
And that's when factories were sadly kind of a little bit more dirty than they are today.
Well, maybe I don't know how they are now, but yeah, it was dirty. But you know what? OSHA was around, so a lot of yellow lines on the floor, right? But the people I got to know through him in that factory, because I was a kid, so he's like showing me around, right? They were all wonderful people, and he'd been doing that since I was tiny, so he had a relationship, already built, and so he and I got to be really close, right? And he was into technology, but of the day,
Sure.
it was mechanic technology, and early on I kind of got hooked into electronics technology, which grew into other things later.
Yes.
And so we had a great deal of affinity, and he and I were like close friends, right? My mom, on the other hand, was a little different. She's in a sense, she was a more traditional mother. She was a little more quieter, kind of more in the background.
Yeah, the way it goes anymore, is it?
Yeah, it doesn't work anymore. God damn it, it doesn't do that anymore. But so she was a little bit more like that. So she's usually the quiet one. But it wasn't until later I realized that she was a real force. But she was like the hurricane you hear about in Florida. It's there and it's affecting the weather here a little bit somehow, but it's there. And she was like that. And there were times when her and I, we didn't get along really well for a lot of time. So because my dad had passed away, so suddenly and early, and then I had a brother who also passed away early, in 1969. He died on the day the astronauts landed on the moon.
Oh, wow.
you know, and so it was just left with me and my mom, right? And that was a problem for me.
And how old were you?
Well, my brother passed away in 69, and I was born in 52, so I was
Okay.
17, 18, whatever
Okay.
it is. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that's all. My brother and my relationship was really kind of interesting too, because he was 7 years older than me.
Oh, wow.
So imagine a 7 year much older than me.
Sure.
I wanted to hang around with him and his buddies. He didn't want anything to do with this little snot kid that wanted to just hang around all the time. I think I told you some of those stories from that too.
Oh, yeah.
But but anyhow, so my brother passed away, and he died in a car accident. It was it was a terrible thing. It affected my mother deeply. She was into a depression for months. She was
Oh,
the type of thing where she would just lay in bed all day, and she'd see the shadow of her body on the wall, and she would think that was her son laid out. I mean, she just was way off somewhere.
so here you are, 17, 18 years old, lost your dad, lost your brother
My dad
to,
dad died after that.
oh, I'm
Later.
sorry.
Yeah, my brother
Okay.
first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Apologies. But with a mom that you really didn't have close
Right.
relationship with and seeing her go through that, that must have been tough.
It was weird, because I was a young guy. What do I know?
Yeah.
And it didn't sink into me, and most of my life, that time and much later too, I was pretty self-centered, So when that happened,
You are so far from that today. I
well,
just have a hard time visioning that, but yeah.
well, I'm glad you know me now, because it would be a different story if you knew me back then. But and so that was a difficult situation between the two of us, and she was aware that I really didn't like her for a long time, it was like that. But she was my mom, so
Yeah.
and I was her son, which is actually more important in this,
Okay.
and so and she could tell. Anyhow, so I moved out to Milwaukee. There's a whole story there. But I moved out to Milwaukee in '93. My mom was still living in Morton Grove, Illinois, in her home. But then, as her health deteriorated a little bit, she got a little older. We sold the house, moved her up here,
Okay.
and she spent the last couple of years of her life living with Tony and I in our house here.
Okay.
And again, my relationship wasn't that hot yet with her,
Oh.
and it really never was till the very end, really.
And that's got to be tough with your relationship with your wife then, having your mom living with you with a relationship you don't have a great relationship.
Yeah.
I don't want to say not great, but not a
No,
close
it was
relationship.
tense sometimes.
Wow.
Yeah, and yeah, God bless Tony, because a lot of it fell on her shoulders because she was home and I wasn't. So she really bore the brunt of taking care of my mom, who by that time was, she had one of those lift chairs and all that
sure.
kind of stuff. So, and she had her own room, but she was never really social on her own. She kind of relied on my dad for that,
Oh, wow.
So she, she never really kind of joined the Milwaukee community so much
Yeah.
before that. So anyhow, I'm making this story longer than needed to be probably, but there's a lot of emotion here, and so and again I got to say, God bless Tony, because she put up with that. And of course, I was influencing her too, because I'm her husband, and I was talking about. She knew that the relationship was tense, so it was tough for
Oh
her
gosh,
too.
yeah.
Yeah, it's not a good situation for anybody, especially Tony though.
And by the way, they are still happily married.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. Just, yeah.
well,
Yeah.
what time is it? Happily, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. But anyhow, so unbeknownst to me, she decided that she was going to leave a legacy, to me. Because at this time, I was the only one left in the family. When she was gone, it was just going to be me. So she decided to write her autobiography. Okay? And this is where you guys came in,
Yeah.
because I told you this story. And she told me some things that were just fascinating. There were details I had no clue about. And her life before I became aware of her life
Right.
became whole much more clearer to me.
So I have a question for you, because I honestly don't remember this piece. Did you read that before she passed away?
Yeah, I
Okay.
did, but I didn't appreciate it.
Oh.
So I read it, and I didn't even read it all the way through. I read it.
Wow.
And then she actually asked me, "So what do you think?" And I thought, "Oh, it was nice." That's why I said to the very end, I just did not appreciate this. After she passed, though, I read it again, and I read it. And I put it down, and I got to say it was very emotional for me, because I realized so much about how poorly I had treated her, And not only that, but also why she reacted to me the way she had, or a lot of that at least,
Yeah.
right? And that whole relationship just dissolved and changed, right at that moment. And I realized it was because she had left me that history,
Yeah.
and it was in her own words, obviously handwritten out. And I think you've seen the book. I mean, it's a
I have
thick book.
not. I have never
Oh,
seen it.
I should have brought it along. It would have been fun.
Wow.
It's one of those little like college notebook things
Sure.
with rings on the side and
Yeah.
all. And it was maybe 75 pages, and there's 50, 60 or those are all filled with her telling me about her life. And when I read it, I didn't read it all at once. I mean, when I finally finished it, I just put it down and went, I was such an ass. And this is one of those things where you wish you could turn the clock back,
Yeah.
or if you go back in time and tell yourself what you should do or shouldn't do. This
yeah.
is one of those.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, yeah. And this was serious to me. This really was serious. And at the time, I was still running this TBG, my IT company, and I'd been doing that on and off for 60 years. IT, technology, different companies, all
Yeah,
that stuff.
TBG. I actually found out what that stood for, I think probably on a Zoom call.
You probably did. Do you remember what it did say?
Two big guys.
That's right. Yeah. So, so that that was I'd been doing that for so long, and I really enjoyed it. I was good at it, but this suddenly became a lot more important. And I was getting up in age, and I knew I'm not going to have that many more turns of the wheel, as much as I would have had like 40 years ago.
Sure.
So it was time, and then you guys came along. I mean, you really were a big part of why I did this, without knowing it. But you really were.
Well, and so then share how that turned into.
Well, and the very first thing I did after I decided I was going to try this out was I got a hold of you,
Of course.
right? And because you had been so enthusiastic about the whole thing when I first brought it up on the Zoom meeting. And so I got together with a friend of mine who was actually Tony's ex-father-in-law.
Sweetest man.
He is, and he and I, when I moved up here in '93, we got connected quickly. He was just the greatest guy, and he would love tech. He was one of these odd ducks in the senior world because he really loved technology and he really wanted to learn. He was pretty good at it too.
He was very good at it because I remember he was flipping around with his iPad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, he knew his way around,
Yeah.
and he would rely on me for help and support and stuff, and so we connected pretty quickly. And then I was around when his wife unfortunately passed away, and they had moved out of his house, and he was getting older, and a couple of places, so he ended up in Luther Manor, and that's where you and I came in. And I sat down with him once, and I told him this story, in my words, and I said, I had this idea. Do you mind if I try this out on you? You can be my guinea pig.
Yep.
And he said, sure, well, let's do it. And so I got a hold of you.
Sweetest man.
I put up a couple of smartphones on tripods,
That's right.
right? And you did the interview, and it was all off the cuff. It was just, you knew what the idea was, but there was no guidance beyond that.
None.
And you did a great job. It was, you just a beautiful job. And
Well,
he was so easy.
I was just going to say, the only reason I did a good job is because he was so easy. And I would like for you to share with everybody his name so that they can go back and look particularly at that one. And also, I just want to reiterate that this is Tony, your wife's ex-father-in-law.
Right, yeah. She had a practice spouse. Right?
Yes, yes. Well, so
who
did
I
you.
know, right. Who I
Yes.
know is, David is, he's a great guy. He lives in Florida now with his.
But it's just interesting because wife's ex-father-in-law that you then forged a amazing relationship.
Well, there's a good
with.
reason for that too, because he was about the same age as my dad would have been at that time. So he kind of filled in that little spot for me in a lot of ways, right? So we got to be really good friends and really close, and I was having that conversation. Anyhow, so you came along, and we did that interview. And I remember when we finished it and we walked out of his apartment, we were walking down the hall to the elevator to leave. You went, God, that was so much fun. You did. And something else happened there that was really awesome in that, and I think I kind of prompted you a little bit on this from behind the cameras, and I said, I want you to use the last question.
Yes.
Right? And that question, and we do that now forever on all of them. The last question was simply, for those people who are going to see this, never having met you, never having known you other than other people talking about you.
Yeah.
And he thought about it for all of about 10 seconds, and then he came up with, and very clearly, he just came up with, be happy on purpose. And you and I are both going, wow, Right? What a great, very short, very brief, exactly what you want to say
Yep.
kind of thing. And so, and that was the end of it. So we walked out of there and it went so well. Anyhow, so that whole thing went so well. And then, we talked about it and all that, and it was great. And then a short time after that, about a month after, because this was October 26th of 2021.
Okay.
That was when it was. And I hadn't formed the company yet.
No, I remember
Yeah.
that. I remember you were not an official nonprofit
Not yet, no. And I was still trying to find out if this was really worth doing, if I was on the right track. And so then we did, a month later, it was on November, the day before Thanksgiving of 21,
Okay.
we did Bill Gilgenbach. Right? Now, the first fellow, you said to mention his name is Bill Shear.
That's
Right.
right. That's
Yeah,
right.
Bill
Yes.
Shear.
Yes.
Yeah. So, hi, Bill.
Yeah.
So then we did Bill Gilgenbach. Now, Bill is a guy from Milwaukee. I met him when I moved here. He's an IT guy. That's how we connected.
In the world, okay, Milwaukee is just so blasted small. So blasted small.
Well,
Yeah.
when I was in Chicago, I used to just call Milwaukee the far north suburb of Chicago. Right? So
Yeah, okay, but I'm
that
pretty
could-
sure we didn't
No, you
appreciate
didn't.
that.
No, you didn't like that. I told that to a few people. They were not happy
Yeah,
when they
no,
heard that.
no.
But so we and I talked to Bill, and he had been battling with colon cancer, and he has already kind of lost a lot of weight, he was kind of
Yeah.
thin as a rail and all that. And he'd beat it, but it came back. And so I ran into him actually at State Fair.
Okay.
We just happened to bump into the same outdoor restaurant, and we talked a little bit, and he said, "Well, let's do this." Right? And so we did it on Thanksgiving, day before Thanksgiving. It was a great interview. It wasn't an earth-shattering one or anything, but it was really very, very nice. It was very, very heartfelt and very family and all of that. And you did a wonderful job.
Yeah, there
of
was a
it.
lot of stuff he didn't want to share, which was very clear.
Yeah. But he did share a lot.
He did.
And particularly talking about his grandkids and
Yeah.
how his wife and all of that. And then unfortunately, almost 5 weeks to the day, on New Year's Eve, he passed away. And so I took that video and put it on a USB drive and went to his memorial service 2 weeks later and gave it to his wife, Jan. And,
Yeah.
you can imagine the reaction. She knew we were doing it, but of course she hadn't seen it yet.
Right.
And so a few weeks later, she sent me a thank you card saying, "Thank you for doing this. I haven't had the nerve to watch this yet, but I will soon." And as it turned out, she did, obviously, later. And she has, about a year now after that, did a little testimonial video for us.
Oh, nice.
How important that was to her. Now, every now and then she'll pull it out and watch it to have a little me time with Bill.
And how cool for when the grandkids get older to be able to at least have him
Right.
there in some way. And so that kind of pushed you a little bit further.
That was it. When that happened and her reaction to it, and I said, I got a hold of something here. I've bumped into something that's really worthwhile. And that's when I decided to actually incorporate. I got a hold of a friend of mine who's an attorney, Elisa Ruhr.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and she donated the corporation setup.
Oh,
God
how
bless her.
nice.
And we were off and running. And then I handled getting registered as a nonprofit, which was really easy as hell. And then I just started collecting volunteers, and a lot of them came from the chamber, because that's a close group.
Very close group,
Yeah.
yeah.
And,
Crazy sometimes, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, close groups and families are crazy.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
The more crazier, the better sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's where it started.
Wonderful. So off and running. So
So thank you for that.
you are most welcome. You are most welcome. And it's been fun watching it grow.
It has.
And just fun, even just today we were talking about the fundraiser that you had. So
Right.
just watching the opportunities for it to grow and for you to touch more lives and make an impact. So now,
So what do you think of all that? You watched me change from this profession to something totally different. Because you knew me long enough to learn
Yeah.
about what I was doing and who I was. And all
Yep.
that. So what did you think of all that?
so I think I think you found your why.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, you were into technology, and by the way, I'm the one supposed to be doing the interview, not you. Nice,
it's my company.
nice. But you were into technology,
Yeah.
long time, clearly enjoyed that and everything else. But I think so much you are passionate about this. You were good at IT. I don't know that passion would be the right
It
word.
used to be.
Okay.
There used to be that there before, long before I came up here.
Okay, so you had lost that passion, but you found a new passion, and this passion truly makes a difference in people's lives. Not that IT doesn't in some good, bad, and different ways, whatever, but this truly is so
Yeah.
impactful. and the stories that you've been able to hear,
Hmm.
lives you've been able to touch. Jan is a perfect example.
Hmm.
So I just think that's amazing. So now I want to play the Tom Mitt, the early years.
Uh-oh.
You grew up on the south side of Chicago.
I was born on the south side of
Sorry,
Chicago.
born
Yeah.
on the south side of Chicago. Grew up.
Grew up in the city first, kind of northwest side.
Okay, I'm not a Chicagoite, so good
This-
part of town,
all right,
questionable
no, good part.
of. Okay.
Think of it as like West Dallas.
Okay.
You know,
All right.
it's a middle
Working
class,
class.
working class area. My dad was working in a machine. As a machine tool guy. The house, the first house we bought. And this was in 1958. So I was 6 years old.
Okay.
First house we bought was in an area, for those of you who know Chicago, is Armitage and Cicero, and there was a big Echo. Echo made pots and pans and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Right, and so there was a Echo plant literally across the street. I mean, I could throw rocks from my room into the factory.
Oh wow.
And so it had all that factory noise and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, but it was, and my parents bought that house they scraped up every penny they could to buy this house. It was a great old house, really, when they actually bought it, they broke my piggy bank to get the last. I mean, it was that kind of
You
stuff.
contributed to the first house.
Yeah, I didn't know I did, but I did. Right. And I mean, and they knew some friends who had helped out. They, gave a little bit of money for down payments and all that kind of stuff. So it was really something to be proud of. And actually, when they finally paid off the mortgage, which was some years later, they had a mortgage burning party.
And people used to do that.
People used to do that. I don't know.
anymore.
Well, I don't know if people stay in houses long enough to get the mortgage paid off. Really.
Yeah, that's true too.
But anyhow, so I grew up there, and then we moved up to the northwest suburbs, an area around what's called Skokie, Morton Grove.
Okay.
Right.
How old were you then?
Well, this was 1963, so I was a little bit 5 years older. So I was about 10, 11 years old when we moved there.
Okay, so really young. We aren't going to dive into that.
Yeah.
So, best friends, trouble you got into? Because you strike me as a got into trouble kind of guy.
Yeah. At the first house, the old one down in the West Dallas area.
Yes.
Right. My parents both worked, and back then, my brother and I were, he was 7 years older, so I was just a little snot, right?
Oh, so was he tasked with taking care of you when they worked?
Well, he was, but he didn't.
Oh.
Yeah, sure I will, Mom. See you later. Yeah, and so they call them latchkey kids now, right?
Yep.
So my mom left work. My dad was already gone. My mom would leave work, and I'd still be home, and it was my job to get out the door and walk to school.
Okay.
Right? Walk to
Yes.
school.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I fully understand that. I did that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I timed when I had to leave in order to make it to school in time by what was on TV. There was this show. I don't even remember what it was now, but there was this. I was a kid. It was a cartoon type show in the morning, one of those morning kids shows, right? Garfield Goose or something like that, And when this part happened, that they had a little bit where they had a little video.
Okay.
When that happened, I had to leave. If I didn't leave, if I stuck around to watch that, I'd be late. So that was what that was like. And I always wanted to. There weren't too many kids around, and I was always kind of a big, chubby kid. And so I got harassed a lot in school. I got bullied a lot. There were these two kids in school that they literally would wait for me after school let out and beat the hell out of me before I got home.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So and that was normal, right? And so that was kind of what that was like. So I was pretty much on my own, which is I think one reason why I got into radio and technology so much, because you could do something on your own.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh
But
gosh, that's so sad.
it's
Especially because now you're just a big teddy bear and everybody loves you.
Yeah, well, it took 60 years to get there, but eventually, I suppose. But and we had friends who lived upstairs. It was like a two-flat, you want to call it, right? And so a duplex, in Milwaukee terms. Right? And so they lived upstairs, and they were also Estonians. My family's all Estonian. And so they already knew each other. So my brother would go upstairs to play cards with his friends upstairs in the back porch. We had an enclosed back porch on both floors. And I wanted to join in because I wanted to be with the big kids. And there were no other kids my age around to play with, or I wanted to play with. And so I would go upstairs in the back and try to get them to let me play. Well, they were playing poker, for God's sake. Let a 6-year-old play poker. Right. But I got mad at him because my brother was like, "Get out of here, and the other guys are going, "Yeah, go away, little kid." And so I got mad at him and went downstairs and my dad was home. So it must have been a weekend or something. My dad was home, and I told him that my brother, whose name was Udo, and I told him that Udo had threatened me with a knife.
Oh no.
So my dad
Did
didn't have
Dad
reaction. He had the dad reaction.
did Dad believe
Of
you?
course he did, because I was a little kid. Why would I lie? So now I wasn't there when this part happened, but my friends who were there,
Yeah.
was there, told me this part. Says they were playing poker, and all of a sudden my dad comes barreling up the stairs, angry as all hell, grabs my brother by the scruff of the neck, drags him back downstairs, and pulls the belt off and does that because that's what we did. That's the way it was, right? Spanked the hell out of him. In the meantime, I was in the background going because I had achieved my goal of getting my brother in trouble.
You didn't feel bad
No,
for that?
no, of course not. No, I did not. I did not. No, I thought I'd been successful in my
Wow.
goal. And
Wait a minute, didn't you earlier say you and your brother had a really good relationship?
later, yeah, well, that was later. But no, back then, because when you're a kid, the age difference of 7 is a big deal.
It's a very big deal.
At
Yeah.
this age, 7 is nothing.
No, it's not.
I know plenty of people who are a lot younger and older than me, 10 more years. But,
Yeah.
but when you're a kid, 7 years is a long time.
It
And
is.
you're a different
6
person.
to 13, big difference, yeah.
So I wanted my revenge because they wouldn't let me play, and I got it. Right. My dad would later find out about it, and I got mine then, but it was too late. I already achieved my goal. So yeah, my brother and I were at odds a lot. You want more? That's only one of them.
I know there's so many. However, you mentioned Estonia,
Yeah.
and I believe I may be jumping too far ahead, but we'll jump all
Yeah,
over
well,
the
no.
place. Because your current wife, you knew long, 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 long. I love your Tony story.
Tony and I have known each other. Well, as you said, we're both Estonian. She's actually half Estonian. She's Latvian, has a Latvian dad and an Estonian mom.
Okay.
But her mom and dad got divorced very early, so she was really in the Estonian world of her family. She and I was in Chicago at the time, and there were the 3 Estonian girls up north that I knew about. Right, it was Tony, Sylvia, and Kathy. Sylvia has since passed on, and we had a folk dance group. There was a church. The whole Estonian community was kind of surrounding a church that
Okay.
was built up for that. Was the center of our culture, and the church sponsored a summer camp in the Indiana Dunes every year for about 15 years,
Wow.
and it was for the families. It only cost the family $20 to send your kid there.
Get rid of your kid?
For a week. Yeah, that's what it was. We thought that we were getting the
Yeah.
time, we were giving the parents the time off. We didn't know that at the time. But it was a week, Sunday through Sunday, so 10 days, whatever that is. It was a lot of fun. It was great fun. And the girls would come down, and I was at the age where girls started to see not so much like aliens anymore. I didn't want to chase them around the schoolyard like I did when I was younger.
Pull their hair.
Yeah,
and-
that kind
yeah.
of stuff. I used to get in trouble at school for that.
Shocker.
And anyhow, so the church had sponsored this folk dance group, and we were pretty good actually, right? And so I didn't dance with Tony, but Tony was in the group, and I was always kind of sweet on her. I thought she was okay, she was a lot of fun. She was cute as hell, right? And so I tried my best to get closer to her, and I got absolutely nowhere. Nowhere at all. And I got, as they call it now, I got friend zoned immediately.
Now, about how old were you guys?
Well, the very first time we met, I don't remember. We were probably about 10 to 11 or 12
Okay.
or something like that. Yeah. And so I was always happy to see her. And when the summer camp would come on, and there would be different events during the year, and then she'd show up and all. And then her friend Kathy, like I said, remember the 3 Estonian girls. So Kathy was one of them. She was the cute perk cheerleader type, and just every guy in the planet wanted to be around her.
Oh,
right?
so you figured I'm not going to go for that one.
No, I had no chance with that. But I mean, you could dream, but and she lives up here now in where's she in Brown Deer or something like
Oh,
that, and
okay.
she's married and it's
Okay.
great and see her once in a while.
Wow.
And anyhow, so years passed by, and Tony got married. I got married. Tony had 2 daughters. I married a woman who had a young daughter, so I became a dad, who I love dearly. Angie, you're going to see this. So you're the center of my life. Um, I'm very privileged to have her because I'm her stepdad. Actually, technically, I'm not anymore because we're not married. I'm not married to her mom, right? But
Yeah, but you'll still always be her stepdad.
well, I'll
'Cause you
always be her
were
dad,
for.
we've had this talk actually, and but she didn't have to let that relationship continue.
No.
She chose it, and for that I'm privileged, for that. So and I always thank my lucky stars for that. And
So you have 3 daughters.
I have 3 daughters. Yeah. So Tony had her, got married, had her kids.
Yep.
That she was married for 17 years. I was married for 9. 9 years has 25,000 stories in there.
I think we'll leave those ones alive.
Yeah, well, at least most of them are. There's a couple good ones in there. But anyhow, so, and I got divorced. Tony had gotten divorced shortly before me. I mean, very, very close
Okay.
time. But I was still in kind of my own sad me stage, right? And so there was an event at the Estonian House, which had become the new cultural center years later after church. And there was an event there, and my mom was there, and Tony was there, but I wasn't. And my mom went to Tony and said, Tom's divorced.
See,
did.
moms know. Moms know.
And so Tony decided to go back and write me a letter, because back when we were older, we would write letters to each other. We'd actually put little things on the outside of the letter for the mailman,
I remember that.
that stuff. And
Yep.
so she wrote me a letter and did the same thing. And when I got the letter, I was actually on the phone talking to my daughter, Angie, right? When I got the letter and the mailbag came, I said, hold on, Angie, let me go get the mail. And I came back to the phone and I opened it up and said, oh my God, I got a letter from Tony, right? And I'd already told her who Tony was.
Yeah.
And so I got a letter from Tony, holy cow. And Angie said, put the phone down and call her now.
I do remember you telling me that, yes.
So Angie was the final kick in the pants. And so I called Tony. This was in July of 93. And we had a really, really good talk. And so I invited her down to Chicago for a date. And this time she went for it. Maybe she rused the day, But and it was July 11th, 1993. She came down. We spent the day at Montrose Beach in Chicago, just hanging around and all that stuff and talking. And then when it's time for her to go, I gave her a kiss. She let me do it. And by October, I had moved up to Milwaukee. It was that quick. I was in a situation where I was a consultant working for Ameritech, so I had more flexibility
yeah.
than she did at the time. So, and the original plan was that I would move up here for 6 years until her youngest daughter, Julie, was out of Longfellow. She was going to Longfellow at the time in Tosa. And then we'd move to Chicago.
Oh.
Right? That was the original plan. I've been here now 30 years.
So what happened to that original plan?
I don't know. It went away. Well, I put down roots.
Yeah.
I put down roots here. Milwaukee's been a great town for me. Actually, truthfully, it gave me an opportunity to start a new life. To be in a new environment, new friends, none of the old baggage, good or bad.
There's plenty of bad.
Yeah, there is.
Plenty of bad. And you hear stories about Chicago, you got stories about Chicago.
Well, I got some, but at that time Chicago wasn't as in some areas at least, wasn't as awful as some of it is now.
Well, and I don't mean it from that perspective. I just mean some of the trouble stories you have shared with us along the way.
Well, okay. So I got to meet a whole bunch of new people and new friends, and that worked out really well. Tony and I started a coffee house pretty soon.
That's right.
Yeah, and
In Tosa.
Yeah, in Tosa. It was called Jitters. We actually stole the name from another coffee house that was up in Minneapolis.
Oh, so far enough away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And they spelled it differently too. It was Jitters with an S at the end. We did Jitters with 2 Z's at the end. So we figured that was
Smart.
enough. Yeah. And it was a cute name too. And we did that. And Tony ran it at first. And it started.
Wait a minute, coffee shops usually are open early in the morning.
Oh yeah, we had to be there at 5:30.
Tony?
Yeah.
5:30.
Yeah, hard to believe.
Very hard to believe.
This is one of the reasons why she doesn't do that now. Yeah, and we were open till after 10 at night.
Oh my.
That's because one of the reasons we chose that place was because it was right next to Bartolotta's Ristorante,
Okay.
and they were open at night, and we wanted to catch the after dinner crowd who would
Okay.
come to our place for coffee and dessert, right?
okay.
Which worked out really well, but it meant we were open 15 hours or whatever that was, right?
Wow.
And we got some staff, and so she would open up usually, and sometimes after a little while we had some people who were working for us, and they would open, but she worked long hours, and then later on I kind of jumped in, and we both did it together, and then that was one of the reasons why I stuck around, or why we stayed here.
What prompted you to open a coffee shop?
Well, when she was coming down to Chicago, when we were dating still for that 3 months that we dated, we would go to coffee houses.
Okay.
And when I'd come up here to Milwaukee, there weren't any.
I was just going to say that's interesting because there weren't coffee shops like there are
No,
now.
there was a place called a Coffee Trader at the time
Okay.
on Downer Street. But it wasn't really a coffee house. It was really a restaurant. And they had coffee and stuff there, and they had better coffee. But it wasn't a coffee house. Starbucks didn't exist.
No.
It wasn't around, at least not around here.
So you took a Chicago idea and brought it up to Milwaukee.
It wasn't a Chicago idea, but a Chicago environment.
Okay.
Right, circumstance.
Chicago
You know,
environment.
Chicago's a little bit ahead of the time as far as that compared to Milwaukee.
Yes.
I think Milwaukee arrived in 1993 in about 2000. Got there about then. So we had that for 6 years. It was very hard on Tony because we set it up like a bar. So not like you go to Starbucks now, you get your drink and you go to your own table and
Yeah.
sit. We didn't do that. We had tables. We had that available. But we had actually bought a bar that an actual bar had gotten rid of. They
Okay.
wanted because they were remodeling. So we bought that bar. It was right around the Marquette area. And we set this up like a bar. So what people would do was they would get their drinks and they'd sit at the bar and chat.
Oh.
So it was great. It was
my
like
gosh,
it was
how
like a tavern. It was like
cool.
the corner tavern kind of
Yeah.
idea. You chat with the barista, right?
Wow.
I always hated that term, barista. It's just the bar person, or the coffee person. It's a barista, We had a rule, by the way, at the coffee house, which is kind of fun. We had a 3-adjective limit. So when you bought coffee, you could have 3 adjectives. You could say decaf with syrup and a lot of foam. But if you added a 4th one, we'd say, I'm sorry, you can't do that. And so we had that because we wouldn't want to fall into that trap.
Of 16 things, and then it's
Right.
what the heck did you really just order?
Yeah, and we met a lot of really interesting people there. There was one guy who was one of our favorite clients, our favorite customers. He'd come in. We don't know his name. I don't remember his name, and Tony doesn't either. But he was the 180-degree guy. He wanted his coffee to be at 180 degrees. That was it.
So when you said 180 degrees, I'm thinking, okay, like half of some. No, you meant 180 degrees.
Yeah, it had to be that temperature, right? He
Wow.
was very sensitive to that. Now,
Oh my
I don't know that he
gosh.
put the thermometer in, but
But
if
he
it was
knew,
too,
but he knew what it was.
if it was too warm or too cool, we
Yeah.
would know.
Wow.
He was a nice guy, but he had a very, very specific thing he wanted. So I met a lot of people though, right?
So TBG.
TBG actually came out of the coffee house because remember I had just moved up here a
Right.
few years before, and I didn't really know that many people yet. I wasn't
Okay.
doing networking like we do now. So I was a consultant at Kraft Foods.
Really?
Yeah, I was doing programming work for them. I found out something interesting about Kraft Foods I never really thought of. You think of all the different foods they make,
Yeah.
cheeses and that kind of stuff, especially.
Macaroni and cheese.
Yeah, right. And they'd have that. They don't have recipes; they have formulas, which is a whole different way of looking at it. And when I first saw that, because part of what I was doing had to do with that,
Okay.
and they showed us. But anyhow, so I didn't know too many people when I moved up here at that time. And I was working at Kraft, but I would help at the coffee house in the evenings and the weekends especially, and so it gave me a chance to meet people because with the way we'd set up like a bar.
Sure.
So and of course when you meet people first, just like a one-to-one you do now in networking, is you say what do you do?
Right.
What are you up to? And I'd say I do programming work. I do work with small computers, and they go, oh my God, can you help me? Right. And sure, it's like being a doctor at a cocktail party. Everyone wants to talk about their sores and their scars and all that stuff.
I have an ailment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, my doctor says I should do this. Do you agree? That kind of stuff. So I would get that kind of interaction with people, And after a while, I mean, I enjoyed it because I got to talk to people, and meet some people there. After a while, I said, I can probably do something with this. And so I started doing work as helping people with it and charging them for it.
Sure.
And actually, I was at Kraft Foods when 9/11 happened, right? And so shortly after that, I thought maybe I can pursue this.
Wow.
And so I created TBG, and I left that programming. I left working at Kraft
Wow.
and all of that, and started TBG in the back room of the coffee house.
This is so amazing because there's so much I thought that I knew
Yeah.
about you. I never knew that story.
There you go. That's the purpose of the Stories
Wow.
Project right there,
Yeah.
isn't it? Right? It's
Gosh.
those details.
Okay, so TBG was launched in the
And
back room of the coffee
And
house.
and you know what TBG stood for. You said it earlier. It's for
Two big guys.
two big guys. Well, the other big guy was one of the people who I got to know through the coffee house, and you've met him. It's
I have.
Jeff Speller.
Yes, thank you. I was trying to remember his name.
He
Yeah.
was originally from Chicago as well, so he and his wife would come down to the coffee house with their two little boys on Sunday mainly, and we got to know each other because Sunday was my day. Tony was off. I would do
Okay.
Sundays, right? And so we got to know each other that way. And he was an engineer,
Okay.
right? And knew a lot of people. He's African American. He knows a lot of the people in his community, right? Plus outside of that too. I don't want to say it that way. And so we got together, and I said, why don't we do something? I'll do the tech stuff, you do the marketing and stuff. And he said, okay.
Wait a minute, you take the engineer and make the engineer the marketing guy?
Well, because he was connected, and he said this is a good
sure.
idea.
Okay.
So he could do that, and he was to do the sales, and I'll do the tech work, and that kind of stuff. And so I started out in the basement of my apartment, and we lived in a loft at Walker's Point at
Okay.
the time, 3,200 square feet in that loft. We paid $1,200 a month for that.
Oh my
This is
gosh.
before it exploded into condos and stuff like it has now.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. And so down on the first floor, and I had set up my office down there and started doing work. And Jeff would find some people for us to work for. But after a year, we decided it was better for us to be friends than partners.
Okay.
And it turns out that was a very smart move.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Because I had earlier, some years before, had gone through the opposite. I started a company with a friend of mine, and it didn't go well, and we never recovered from that friendship-wise. And I said, my friendship is more valuable than my company. So Jeff and I, we split up. We're still great friends. I saw him. He was at the fundraiser last night.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah, and we, for a long time, for probably about 15 years, we would meet every Saturday morning for breakfast.
Oh,
Right.
that's so
And life has changed now, so we can't do that all the time, but we still
Yeah.
do regularly.
Oh.
So that was TBG that started, and after a while it grew. I hired a tech to help me. It grew a little more. I opened an office in West Dallas, in downtown.
And you
West
actually
Dallas.
started doing the sales and the marketing yourself.
I did.
and you were very good at it.
I found out that I was not too bad,
You were not bad at all. You were
Yeah.
actually very good.
and that worked out. So
And so
Yeah.
actually think about it.
yeah,
That gave you seeing that side of you, being the people person, wanting to be promoting, supporting, doing that, actually led itself perfect to the Stories Project.
it actually did, and it actually reminded me of something that my mom had said. I mean, this is totally off the wall. I thought here, but my mom had said many years ago when I was just a little boy, going to grade school, and she was talking to some other mother for somewhere, and I overheard it. And she said something along the lines with, yeah, Tom was able to make friends with people all the time, real easily. And I heard that, and I went, what's she talking about? And I never thought about it until much later. And you just reminded me of it when you said that. And yes, I seemed to be able to do that, but for a long time I never took advantage of it, I guess.
Well, and when you shared earlier that your very young years, that you got picked on and bullied and stuff.
Yeah.
So even if you were that outgoing kind of person, that's going to pull anybody back.
Yeah, it did.
Sadly.
It did a lot.
So Lord only knows what you would have been if not for that. But I do think it's interesting because I don't think I knew the part of with Jeff that he was originally doing the marketing, you were doing the tech stuff. He left, you had to do that stuff. You were wonderful at that, fit perfectly into the relationships and the marketing that you do for the Stories Project.
It's worked out, hasn't it?
Full circle, isn't that interesting?
It is interesting, yeah. And you wonder at what point does your personality get formed, who you are? And I don't think that's a valid question. I think it keeps reforming.
I was just going to agree with you on that. I really truly think it does. It evolves, and you become who you are because of all of the people that have played a part
Yeah.
in your life and who supported you and who pushed you to do the Stories Project. Oh, speaking of, do you have a tagline? Did you find one that you like yet?
I keep trying them. I have a number of different ones. Well, the one with TBG was my favorite.
Oh, I love the
That was the
TBG.
best, because we
Yes.
make computers
Behave.
and I got everybody in the room to say the behave word, and
Yep.
it just became a fun thing. Matter of fact, when I first started the Stories Project, people said, "We make people something." We're
Yeah,
trying to
you
adapt
had
that.
to come up with something.
And they
Yeah.
tried to make it work with the behave thing, and that didn't work. But
Making people behave. I don't think so.
no. We tried, get their stories before they die.
Oh, yeah, well, that is
It's
the gist of it.
It's
Yeah, that's not
correct.
quite what you want to say.
It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't work well on a billboard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Capturing memories.
Yeah, too blasé. Too
Excuse me.
boring. Well, I'm sorry, but
Okay.
not every.
So you've tried a couple.
I've tried a couple, and I've settled on a few, but I still haven't picked one exactly. And don't let
Okay.
their stories get away.
Yep,
That's
that's a
that's
good one.
okay. That's okay. It's still not doesn't have a zing to it, but it's still okay. The one I used this morning, which actually got a really interesting response, and I've used it a while now. It's you only exist as long as you're remembered.
Yeah. And the room kind of
Yeah.
when you said that
it had
this
an
morning.
impression.
It did.
It didn't make them laugh like
No,
the other one
no,
did,
well,
but it had an impression.
it did.
And I think they remembered that. So there were a couple others I thought, but I kind of worked playing with those two, right? And I think I like that one right now the most. We'll see. We'll see what else comes up. So
And that is kind of nice because it's then how can you make sure you're remembered, but more importantly is that your grandkids sometime that you may not have an opportunity to meet will have an opportunity
right,
to meet you.
right. And that's something I learned actually now that we're at the end, past 2 years of the Stories Project now, and something I learned through the first year. When I first started this, and you were around for that. When I first started this, I thought the way to promote this would be to go find seniors and talk to them, and get them, to say, yeah, that's a great idea, let's do it. And I found it's absolutely not true. It doesn't work. Because most of the seniors, not all, but most of the seniors I talked to would go, I didn't do anything interesting. Or nobody wants to hear my story. I hear a lot of that.
You think about your mom's story, but they're right.
Yeah.
Because you didn't care to hear
No.
the story, but later.
Yeah, and that led me to some more understanding of that too. And that's that when you're young, and I think the cutoff is before you have a family of your own, you get to that point of your life. Seniors are aliens. They're alien creatures, right? You have no connection to them, right? Except maybe your name, but that's about it, really, for most part. Now,
They're
it's not-
that person you have to go visit.
Right,
with your
right. The one with
parents
the, with
when I'd rather be doing something else.
grandma with the mustache, that kind of stuff, and our aunt is always using her Kleenex and just spitting, cleaning, that kind of stuff, those kinds of things. But the relationship is far apart. Yeah. But once you get to the age of having a family, and maybe not in then, and you're to your 30s, and so by that time you've probably experienced a loss somewhere along the way. Maybe it's your family, a friend, or something, but you've experienced that, and you start to realize that there is an end to this. When you're a kid, you don't think of that at all. I remember when I was a kid walking to school back in Chicago, 1960 somewhere, and I decided to calculate my age at the year 2000.
Oh my gosh, we all did that, I think.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was the only one. Okay.
Oh gosh,
cool.
no, we all did that.
Well, when I figured that out, I figured I'd be 47.
Oh my God, you'd be so old.
Exactly, and it wasn't real at all to me. It was like a cartoon saying that. It didn't make any sense. Of course, I'd die to be 47 now. It'd be great, but. So yeah, it's not real to you when you're younger, but when you reach a certain age, and I think it's different for everybody, you start to realize that there is an end, and you start to realize there's some value in those people that you didn't have any relationship before. Some people never reach that point, but I think most people do eventually, 30s, 40s, somewhere in there, and I think the big impetus is having your own family, your own kids, because you start to realize you're not going to be around all
Right.
the time. So you want to set things up so that when you're gone, they're okay. Think about life insurance and all those kind of little mundane things, right? And so you worry about that, and suddenly that becomes a little bit more interesting, a little bit more important.
So your target audience then
Is the adult children.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so for the most part, the people that we've interviewed are in that chair because the adult children made them do that.
Well, and you think about that if you're the adult child and you have little kids, toddlers,
Yeah.
or even early grade school,
Right.
and grandma and grandpa are getting older, by the time they're old enough to really know them, are they going to be there?
Right.
And what a gift to be able to, I want you to be able to know grandma and grandpa.
Exactly right. Yeah.
How many stories have you done so far?
First year we did 15.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was the year when we were really figuring out how to do it, how to make this all work. And
And there's been some changes along the way.
there have been some changes along the way. I learned, I've done a lot of businesses. I've never done a nonprofit before.
Oh, that's a beast into itself.
It is. A lot of the basics are the same. You still need processes and
Yes.
systems and, finance and legal. You need all that stuff no matter what kind of company or organization you've got. But when you hop into the nonprofit world, you've got different things. And of course, you know all this because you're in a nonprofit. You've got things like a board.
Mm-hmm.
You've got volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got different sources of revenue. It's a different thing. You're not selling shoes,
Right.
you're selling something else. You're selling an idea really more than anything else. You're doing the same thing with the chamber. It's an
Yeah.
idea that the chamber is worth your time.
Right.
And mine is, the idea that your family's history is worth your time, right? So that's a different thing. The volunteers has been the thing that's been the craziest for me. Raising money, that's different too, but that one I can kind of understand.
Yeah.
Volunteers is like, what the hell are they doing? Well, it started out, and you were there when this, I was putting out the word to get people to help me, and I had a big meeting. Everybody was interested. Come on, we'll have a meeting. We'll talk about it. We'll decide how this is going to go.
Right.
And there were like 25 people there. I thought, most of them from the chamber. And I thought, this is cool. I can deal with
Piece
that.
of cake.
Yeah, it's exactly what I thought. And so then about a month later, I said, okay, I'll have another one. We'll, kind of make it into a pep rally kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think like 5 people showed up. And I was all depressed. I says, what did I do wrong?
Right.
Did I not bathe or something? And that happened a couple of times. I tried again. And the crowd got smaller and smaller. A lot of the people in that first meeting, and I was looking for volunteers especially to be interviewers,
Sure.
like what you're doing now. And so when a potential interview would come up on the schedule, I'd put the word out through email to all these people on my interviewers list. And I'd say, okay, I've got this person set up to come on Thursday at 10, or whatever it was going to be. And it's going to be at their house. They're in, wherever they're in Muskego or whatever it is. And so I need somebody who's going to be able to do this. And crickets. I'd get absolute crickets. And I've had to reschedule a few. And I actually had to cancel a few, and reschedule them and all that stuff. So that became a real problem. So at the very beginning, I had a lot of interviews. I was doing about one a week, right at the very beginning. By the end of the year, I was lucky to do one a month, because the scheduling was an issue. And then in early part, I was doing the videos. I was trying to get, Taylor Scott was one of the people I remember.
That's right.
She was interested in doing this. So I was kind of grooming her to do some of the video technical work. As it turned out, that didn't work out because she was doing other things and she didn't have the time to do it. So I was really looking for someone to help with the video because I knew if I was going to do it all, I could only grow so much.
Right.
So, and luckily, maybe not luckily, but whatever the reason was, Norman Ramdor
Yes.
jumped in. And he has a great company called Triple Square Productions. He does video. That's his job.
Right.
Right. And he offered to help as a volunteer.
I remember I did a couple with him.
That's right.
Yeah.
And God bless him. He did a great job. But what a burden for him because we were doing it at people's homes.
He had to haul
Not a
all
studio
the
like
equipment,
this.
set
All the
everything
equipment.
up.
And I
That's
really
right.
couldn't help much except to be, the guy carrying things for him. So we go to people's homes. He'd have to arrange the furniture that made sense for the lighting. He'd set up the cameras, the microphones, all of that, and then, do the recording. And then we'd have to pack it up and leave when we were done. But then after that, he would have to then edit this. He'd have 2 or 3 cameras, each with their own recording. So we'd have to put this, hour and a half, 2 hours of stuff and combine it to make one decent 45 minutes to an hour maybe end result. And that's a lot of work. It took them a long time too.
And volunteer.
And a volunteer, yeah. And I kept saying, I know I'm abusing you. One of these days I'll maybe pay you something. I probably will never be able to pay you what you deserve, but and so and the timelines between the interview and the time we could deliver the thing to the people who wanted it, sometimes would stretch into 2 months because he has a business, and I couldn't push him on that.
And if you think about the situation that you shared earlier about Bill Gilgenbach,
Exactly.
that time, wow.
Yeah. So God bless Norman. He really carried us through that. But I knew that I couldn't continue doing that forever. So, I set up a small studio, which, that didn't work. But then now I hooked up with John Taylor. Thank you, John, to make this work here. So this is going to now be our primary location for doing stuff. So.
And how nice, because it's set up, it's
it's gorgeous.
ready to go. Well,
Yeah.
not John makes it set up and
Yeah.
ready to go. So let's go back a little bit to your childhood, because there's so many. Well, no, because there's so
You really like
many-
going there, don't you?
I do, because
you've heard
there
some
are
of this,
so
yeah.
many cool Chicago stories. So what was your first gig in Chicago? What were you doing in Chicago?
The very first thing?
Yeah.
How far back do you want me to go?
Well,
When
okay.
I was about 7 years old, I was going door to door selling all occasion greeting cards.
Really?
Yeah, this is one of those things you see in the back of a comic book. Comic books were very big back then.
Oh my gosh, I never knew that.
Yeah, and so
So an entrepreneur at 7.
right at the beginning, yeah, and I would go knock on the doors. Now I'm a little 7-year-old boy, and I had some a little sample, these card boxes. I'd had samples with me. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew I was supposed to go out and meet people, And this is one of these scam things in the company. They'd get you to buy you bought the equipment, the materials. And then if you sold something, you would write it up and you collect the money and all that stuff.
Okay.
But you were buying the materials first, which wasn't a huge amount, but it was some. And so I would go, I remember one in particular. I would go to somebody's house. Now this was kind of a West Dallasy neighborhood,
Okay.
right? And so the person I was talking to was at the second floor, and I was at the first floor ringing the doorbell, right? And so I heard this voice up in the top going, "Who's there?" Right? And I go, and I would, in my tiny little 7-year-old voice, go, "All occasion greeting cards," like that. He said, "Get the hell out of here!" And I was like, "Oh, great!" So I was turned off to door sales pretty quickly. The next job I had was a newspaper boy. I went on a bicycle
Okay.
with the little pouch
Yep.
full of newspapers, and
And you
I
throw
delivered.
the newspapers and
Throw them up on a porch, yep. And that was okay. This was the Chicago Tribune, or no, Chicago American at the time. There is no more American. But
Chicago American?
yeah,
Huh.
that was there were at the time there was Chicago American, Sun-Times, and the Tribune, and I
Okay.
worked for the American.
All right.
And so after school, I would get on my bicycle, drive to the local guy's garage where he had a whole bunch. It was like Oliver Twist,
Yes.
Yeah,
and
so we'd
you
all
pick up
converge
your-
on his garage, and he would send you on your way into your particular route
And you did this on a bicycle.
on a bicycle. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And
Yeah.
this garage was probably 5 miles from our house.
Oh wow.
So I would bike over and pick that up, and then I think it was once a month or once every couple of weeks, it was our job to go collect from the people, which was sometimes really interesting. And then on Sundays, the pickup truck would drop off the Sunday paper, which was this thick, right at that time. Now, Sunday paper is like a pamphlet,
Yeah.
right? But and it was in parts, so I had to put it together.
Oh, you had to assemble it?
Yeah, so you get the main part, the sports and the comics, and you have to put it together.
Wow.
My dad would help me, bless his heart. We'd be on the porch of that first house,
Nice.
and we'd put it together, and then he would drive me because it's too heavy.
Yeah.
It's too heavy for all that for a kid.
So did you do that through an entire year, through a winter as well?
Yeah, yeah.
And how did the dad drive you during the winter then?
No, I rode the bicycle.
Wow.
No, and now there were a couple of days when the snow was so bad I couldn't, and then I just didn't.
Okay.
And the guy said, "Well, okay, can understand it, but."
So for those young people watching this, you rode your bike in the snow in the winter?
5 miles to pick it up.
Uphill both ways.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, yeah. So, but those you asked if my first jobs. That was those
Wow.
were it.
Okay. School?
I went to the Henry D. Lloyd School.
Okay.
That was my middle school actually. The first school was Goethe School, Goethe, named after the German writer.
Okay.
And that was kindergarten, first and second or grade or so.
Okay.
And then when we moved up to the suburbs, no, I'm sorry, we moved. Boy, I'm screwing up. We moved. The Lloyd School was the first one. Goethe was the second, I think. God, I got them in all right now. But anyhow,
Okay, so first best friend you can remember.
my first best friend I can remember was named Gary something or other, and we had we were it was two little boys walking down the street, arm in arm, on the shoulders, that kind of thing, until one day he did something and pissed me off. I even forget what it was, and then it became really rocky.
Oh.
Right? So but every day we would walk to school, and there was on the way to school there was a bowling alley. We'd walk down
Okay.
Armitage Avenue, and across the street was a O. Henry chocolate factory,
Ooh.
and across the street from that was a Good Humor ice cream factory.
Oh my.
Yeah. So at the chocolate factory, they would every few weeks or so, I don't remember what the schedule was, they would have a big truck come up to the factory, and it was filled with melted chocolate. Like a big milk truck, those big round, milk trucks.
Got it.
Right?
Okay, yeah.
So it would pump out the melted chocolate. You had to have it cold, hot, otherwise they couldn't
Yeah.
pump it, right? So they pumped that out, and we'd hang around, and when they were done, they would let us stick our arms up the tube, so it would cover it with chocolate all the way up to your shoulder, right? And then we'd walk around, wait for it to cool down because it was burning like hell. But we did it because we knew the end result would be so cool. And then
Can you even imagine in this day and age? First of all, they don't do that, but if they
No.
did, they would never.
No, they never allow
So then
anything
what'd
like
you do?
that.
Walk around eating your arm
Well,
all
you'd
day?
pick it off or eat it or however you could, And the Good Humor plant, which was literally across the street from there, they would make the chocolate, the ice creams on a stick,
Yeah.
those things, popsicles and that kind of stuff. But they would have leftovers, so we'd go to the big garage door they had there and hang around there, and every now and then the guys would give us a bag of these things. And if they weren't there to do that, we would go around to the backside to the dumpster where they would get rid of the defects. They weren't bad, but they were defective.
yeah.
Like the stick was on the side.
Yeah.
Something weird
Not
like
perfect.
that.
Can't sell it.
And
yeah.
so we would dumpster dive for those. And so, and of course you'd get those little sticks, ice cream sticks. And so we had a huge collection of ice cream sticks that we'd do, and then we'd build things with them when we were a kid, make little cabins and stuff like
Oh my
that.
gosh.
So,
Oh my
yeah.
gosh, how cool.
yeah.
I love that story of sticking your arm in the
In the big tube, one of those big flexible metal tubes that
Yeah.
they would use. But now I'm sure they plug right in, if they even do that. They wouldn't let any kid do that. But yeah, it was fun.
So, other Chicago stories? I know there's a lot. Keep them clean.
Oh darn! Well, that takes care of half of them.
Yeah, dead people. Yeah, let's not talk about.
I'll do that. There was. I did mention the bowling alley.
Yes.
And bowling was pretty big back then. You remember in the 50s and 60s, it was bowling and wrestling and all that
I
kind of
do.
stuff. It was
I
very
actually
big.
had an older brother who was actually a really good bowler, on
okay.
a circuit.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So we'd go bowling, and you'd rent your shoes. Right?
Yes.
And I would go bowling with my friends or whatever. We'd go to the alley, and there were more than a couple of times when I didn't have enough money to rent the shoes, but they would give you the shoes, and then you paid on the way out.
Okay.
Right. And so I didn't have the money to pay, so I'd go home with bowling shoes, which was only a few blocks away. It wasn't that far, but I'd walk home in bowling shoes. And
But then that means you didn't get your shoes back
Right,
because you turn your shoes in.
you thought of that, didn't you?
I did because I know how that worked.
But I didn't, because it's the last thing I wanted to do is confront someone and say I didn't have enough money. So I would go home, and there was in my mom's dresser drawer, there was a little place where she kept some money, and I stole some money, and then I'd go back and say, oh, I'm sorry, I left my shoes, and I'd pay them, and I'd get my shoes back, and that turned out to be pretty easy to do. So I did it a lot, and then I got caught, of course, because my mom said, hey, where's my money go?
Yeah, I was just going to say, at some point in time, Mom's going to realize there's some.
The one
money
thing I
missing.
could never do was lie to my dad. I could lie to my mom any day, right? That was easy. But I could never lie to my dad for some reason. So she asked me, and I said, no, well, I don't know.
Must have been my older brother.
Yeah, right. I didn't think of that one, but good. But then she said something to my dad. My dad asked me, and I broke into tears and went, "Oh, I did it." Well, then the inevitable belt came off.
Oh, yeah, something parents never do nowadays.
No. I actually talked to my daughter about that. I said, "Do you ever spank the kids, or when we used a belt? I mean, do you ever do
Yeah.
anything like that?" And her mom was from the South, and so they used a switch. They'd send the kid out to cut their own willow switch. To do that.
You shared with us about the start of the Stories Project,
Yep.
and I have to say seriously, I am so pleased that I was an early part of that, and
You were.
probably a
Important
little
part.
bit more of it than I even thought that I
Yeah.
was. A little bit about your childhood. We're gonna wrap up part 1, but as I said at the beginning, we are definitely gonna have a part 2, and we're gonna save that final wrap-up question that we always have for the end of part 2.
I would say it's amazing how people have an influence on you, and they have no idea.
Oh my gosh, that is so true. And off camera, I'll share a story with you about that.
Okay.
That is just so amazing. And you don't know. And every once in a while, you're blessed to find out.
Yes.
But so many times you have no
You
idea.
have no idea. How would you know?
Yeah. So,
So thank you.
oh my gosh, such a pleasure to spend
All right.
time with you.
This is great.
And
I
we'll
enjoyed
spend
it.
more time together. And again, it took me a long time, to get you to agree, but then for crying out loud, to get us to actually match up calendars.
And then to get me to stop talking.
No, that's never going to happen. All right, I'm looking forward to part 2.
Me too. Thank you.
You bet.
All right.